In 1981, the CIA asked McMichael for a report on the Nicaraguan press, opposition parties and church.
And my conclusion was that, you know, there was a significant space for these groups to operate, but that they were in no danger of suppression or disappearance. Compared to any other Central American country, Nicaragua has by far the liveliest opposition press and media. Over 2/3, for example, of the 40-odd radio stations in the country are still privately owned and generally speak their mind.
When McMichael spoke his mind, the CIA didn't like it. He was sacked.
The Sandinista dictatorship of Nicaragua, with full Cuban Soviet bloc support, not only persecutes its people, the church, and denies a free press, but arms and provides bases for communist terrorists attacking neighboring states.
I certainly don't recognize any of the diatribes that have been made against the Sandinistas as to the persecution of the church, persecution of peoples, the denial of human rights. That is not in my experience.
After 4 years of fighting the Americans, the Nicaraguan government has now suspended most civil rights. In the world's newsrooms, they are more inclined to listen to the President of America than to the President of Nicaragua. So in the propaganda battle, the CIA's inventions still hit the front page. In 1982, they produced convincing evidence of Soviet bases in Nicaragua.
I used to laugh and say, look at that Soviet-style baseball diamond over there, you know. You know, this is almost foolish, really, you know, to talk about this. First of all, they're not Soviet military bases. That's the whole point. The second is that a barracks is a barracks, you know, an obstacle course is an obstacle course.
How about this for a story? Just under a year ago, the Americans discovered a Soviet freighter carrying MiG fighter planes, which they said were on their way to Nicaragua. Here's the story on the front of the Times. Moscow warned on Nicaraguan MiGs, and there's a picture of a MiG-21. According to President Reagan, this showed that Nicaragua was a threat to the United States.
And as it turned out, this was the evidence for this was based on satellite photography, which showed crates at an East European port facility, which were determined to be, in the science of cratology, the crates of the sort in which MiG aircraft frequently were shipped. And subsequent photographs a day or two later showed that these crates were no longer on the dock. And an amazing leap of logic, it was advanced that necessarily they must have been delivered to Nicaragua, or were on their way to be delivered to Nicaragua. Well, you know, it's the usual thing. The charge makes the headlines. The retraction makes the inside pages. 8 or 10 days later, it's revealed, well, MiGs weren't on the way, but that's no longer a headline. So what one is left with is the overall impression from the screaming headlines of the week earlier that Nicaragua continues to represent this enormous danger to the security of the United States. This nation of 3 million impoverished souls, half of whom are under the age of 15, you know.
Well, I would say people are very silly if they believe everything that newspapers tell them, and I think probably anybody who buys a newspaper needs a course on how to read newspapers.
Part of my reason for coming out of the CIA is that it was a tragedy, a travesty of U.S. principles of freedom and democracy, that you would have the United States setting up a tradition of supporting dictatorships, brutal ones, forming and training their brutal police and death squads, while the Soviet Union, which has had periods of pretty harsh policies towards its own people, is winding up the champion of real freedom throughout the world. If you have a dictator and you want some help getting rid of him, you cannot go to the United States, you can go to the Soviet Union.
People in the foreign policy establishment, let us put it this way, and I believe this is not only true of my own country but many others, you know, believe that in the interest of national policy that it is legitimate to lie. They do not feel it is dishonorable to lie, and when they do lie well, they expect to be rewarded for it.